Fordham buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Now that Roy's gone, if we've gone, pack and leave for good. That's what she said, over dinner, while I was still wearing black. My fork hung in the air, untouched. The smell of lukewarm green beans. The silence after it. Marcus cleared his throat, but said nothing. His eyes never met mine. The scrape of Elena's chair, neat and slow, filled the space Roy used to hum in. I looked at his empty seat, third from the left. Always third. The cushion still dipped where he sat. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. You shouldn't live alone, she added. It's not safe at your age. I turned 68 3 months ago, not 98. With a voicemail from Dad. You can't handle this old house, Elena continued, sipping her iced tea like it was a board meeting. This house. Roy built it with his own hands. Floor by floor, from Dad. Nail by nail. My voice came out quieter than I meant. We raised our son here. Marcus finally looked up. Blinked. Voicemail, Dad. Maybe it's time for a new chapter. New chapter. Was this not my story anymore? My eyes fell to my plate. Chip blue china. Roy loved that pattern. Unvorsted. We used it on birthdays, holidays, even Tuesday meatloaf nights. I pushed the plate away. The silverware rattled. Where would I even go? I asked. Elena shrugged. Thessay from Dad. There's a lovely community in Mobile. Weekly bingo. Shuffleboard. I lost my husband 7 days ago, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Now I'm being shipped off like a box of winter coats. The porch light flickered through the window. Roy always fixed that bulb. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Said even small things deserved attention. I stared out at the shadows. They'd measured the guest room yesterday. I thought it was for visitors. But no. It was already decided. Already taken. Marcus folded his napkin too carefully. 2 weeks should be plenty of time. 2 weeks. To erase 42 years. And sweep them into boxes. The house creaked behind me. Not from wind. From memory. I stood up slowly. My knees ached. But not as much as my heart. Roy used to say, don't speak when they expect silence. Make them wait. So I said nothing. Not yet. But inside something was shifting, not rage. Not fear, something quiet. Steady. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from it and unmovable, the house didn't always creak like this. Back then, it breathed. Roy and I had bought this plot in 1982, just outside Huntsville. Bare land, red clay. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and one pecan tree that never gave fruit, he'd wake at dawn, pull on his work boots, and kiss my forehead before mixing concrete. I'd pack his thermos with coffee. Voicemail from Dad fonda sometimes as add us a slice of cornbread if I had time. We didn't have much. Just a beat-up Ford, 2 borrowed hammers from Dad, and a ledger of hand-drawn floor plans taped to the fridge. But Lord, we had dreams. The first room Roy framed was the kitchen. Food first, he said. Even before shelter. I'd never heard a man say that with such conviction when we finally moved in. Months later, when a phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, with no drywall and a tarp for a roof, we ate lentil stew by flashlight. The folding table wobbled, but Roy insisted on setting it properly. 2 chipped plates. From Dad. 1 candle. That night rain tapped on the tarp like 1,000 tiny prayers. I'd never felt richer. There was no heat except for the fireplace. I remember us laughing, then huddled in sleeping bags, steam curling off our breath. You cold? He asked. No, I lied. He draped his flannel over me anyway. When foised with a voicemail from Dad, that's the thing about love, real love. It doesn't shout. It wraps a coat around you without asking. He built every beam in this place, every shelf. And my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The hallway trim was crooked, but I never told him. It made the house feel like us. Handmade, a little flawed, but true. Marcus took his first steps on these floors. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Roy stayed up 3 nights sanding them smooth. He said, a boy's first fall shouldn't draw blood. The stairs still squeak at the 4th step. I never fixed it. When my phones with a voicemail, I liked hearing who was coming and going. Now, it's just me. No Roy. No laughter echoing off bare wood. Only memories curling at the edges like old photographs. I was sipping my light when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and they want me to leave. They want me to walk away from every nail he drove, every bruise on his knuckles. But where does a tree go once it's rooted? This house is my tree, and they're asking me to chop it down. I was 6 months pregnant when Roy built the crib. No fancy instructions. When my phone buzzed was with a voicemail from Dad, just pencil sketches and a soft glow lamp on the kitchen counter. He sanded every edge until it was smooth enough for a baby's dream. With a voicemail from Dad, Marcus won't get a single splinter, he told me. And he never did. That crib sat in the corner of our room for nearly 3 years. From Dad, I couldn't bring myself to move it. The baby smell lingered longer than I expected. Powder, milk, warmth. Some nights, when Marcus was fussy, from Dan or Roy would lift him and hum old hymns. Deep, steady, off-key. Our son slept best in his arms. By kindergarten, when my phone gom knul from Trout and Dag, Marcus knew how to spell Pagan because it had carved his name into that trunk twice, once with a heart around it. I traced it just last fall. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It's faded now. We didn't travel. No cruises. No Disney. But every summer, we built forts from old blankets and read library books aloud till the power bill came due. Roy believed in stories. He used to say, "A good story tells you who you are." A funny thing is, we never told Marcus how little we had. With a voicemail from Dad, just made sure he never felt it. He always had enough socks, enough books, enough birthday cake, even if it was just boxed mix and icing from a dented can. When a bice with a voicemail from Dad he got into college on scholarship, Roy cried the day he left, tried to hide it behind the shed, wiping his eyes with sawdust-covered gloves. And now, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Marcus sits across from me, folding napkins while his wife plans where to put the Peloton. Like this house was some old moto they've outgrown. With a voicemail from Dad. Like I was the last unpaid guest. I gave everything so he could build his life. And now they ask me to quietly pack mine away. Grief isn't the hardest part of widowhood. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it's realizing your memories mean more to the walls than to your child. The light shifted across the kitchen floor, same wooden planks Roy laid, one by one, with a voicemail from Dad with his knees wrapped in duct-taped pads and a pencil behind his ear. I stood up slowly and walked past the table. From Dad. The chair by the window creaked as I touched it. The one he always claimed, even when guests came. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, said the light helped him think better in the mornings. His coffee mug still sat on the shelf, Phi 1 Papa, in blue paint, chipping at the handle. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Marcus gave it to him when he was 9. That boy once cried because he lost his lunchbox. Now he wants to sell the house I kept warm when we couldn't afford heat. Until and phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. On the hallway wall hung our wedding photo, faded at the edges, glass cracked from one Thanksgiving accident. I'd meant to fix it. Somehow, the crack felt honest. We weren't perfect, but we were real. Roy looked so young in that picture. So sure. Me? I looked scared, but determined. I stepped into the living room, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The fireplace was cold now, but I could still smell faint traces of pine and smoke. Dust with a voicemail from Dad. Roy used to mix dried herbs into the fire, for luck. The scent lingered on winter coats long after snow had melted. There, on the mantel, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, sat the little tin box I used to store letters. One envelope peeked out, creased and yellowed. Roy's handwriting on the corner. I didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I stood in the middle of that room and let the quiet speak. It said, "You've been fading for a while now, Marilyn." And not just after Roy passed. The pause with a voicemail from Dad. Not just when Elena started calling less. Not when Marcus stopped hugging me goodbye. It started slowly. A missed invitation. A joke I didn't catch. But a phone was a voicemail from Dad. A couch bought where to put it, and now. Now they want me out completely. Erase the woman, keep the wood floors. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, they forget this house wasn't given to me. It was made with my calloused hands and prayers whispered into sawdust. If I leave without a word, the story ends here. Voicemail from Dad. But if I stay, maybe, just maybe, I get to write the rest. Elena showed up on Thursday. She didn't knock. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Just waltzed in with a leather tote and that clipped tone people use at estate sales. "Hope you don't mind," she chirped. Voicemail from Dad. "Thought I'd help you get a head start." She meant packing. I was in the living room, folding a quilt Roy's mother made for us. Green and tan. Busted with a voicemail from Dad, stitched with initials that had started to fray. Elena eyed it like it was a museum piece overdue for storage. "Such vintage taste," she said, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, brushing dust from the piano that hadn't been played since Marcus left for college. I didn't reply. She set her bag down on the coffee table without asking. Her papers spilled out. Folders, brochures, a checklist titled Transition Plan. She tapped the list. We've mapped out the essentials, what you'll need. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. What can be donated, what we might repurpose. Keeps things smooth, repurpose. I looked at her across Roy's coffee table. His initials were still carved into the leg. When my phone buzzed, voicemail from Dad, from when Marcus was 4 and scribbled everywhere. Roy had turned the accident into a feature. Now she wanted to smooth it out. Has she have a voicemail from Dad? She opened up the folders and held up a glossy flyer. Serenity Oaks Senior Living. 2. Bedroom suite. Nature trails, game nights. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, full medical access. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment. It had water stains from the winter. Roy broke his wrist and I patched the roof myself. Not pretty, but it held. Do they have stained ceilings? I asked. Elena blinked. Excuse me. Nothing, I said, folding the quilt and setting it gently on the couch. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, she cleared her throat. I get that it's emotional, but holding on to clutter can be, well, it's a common issue for older adults. There it was. The insult. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, hidden in concern to Marcus, who had just walked in from the porch, sipping coffee like nothing was happening. Elena thinks I'm a hoarder now. Elena tired smiled? He gave a tired smile. She didn't say that. She didn't have to. He sat down slowly. Mom, voicemail from Dad. We're just trying to make this easier for you. You mean for yourselves? No. That's not fair. I nodded. When my phone buzzed voicemail from Dad, neither is being told to leave the life a wife I built, 'cause my presence makes your wife uncomfortable. Silence. The kind that presses against your ears like altitude. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Elena started flipping through the checklist again, pretending to be useful. She didn't see the way my hand tightened on the edge of Roy's table. But I felt it. Something had shifted again. Not rage. Not quite. But I wouldn't call it stillness anymore either. I know it's hard to let go, Elena said, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, holding up a photo album I hadn't touched in years. She flipped it open casually, like it was a magazine in a waiting room. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But sometimes holding on to the past keeps us from living fully now. She stopped at a picture of Roy in overalls, crouched next to Marcus with a toy hammer in hand. From Dad. Cute, she said. Then closed the album and stacked it in the donation pile. My throat tightened. That photo wasn't just cute. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was the day Roy taught Marcus how to fix the porch rail, said every boy should know how to steady something that's broken. I stepped forward and took the album back. From the quiet. No drama. Just took it. Elena blinked but said nothing. Marcus, sensing the tension, cleared his throat. Mom? Phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I wanted to mention something else while we're all here. Like that phrase. While we're all here? Like I was a guest. He set his coffee down, eyes avoiding mine. With a voicemail from Dad. The house title, your name's still on everything, and with the bank stuff, taxes, utilities. A voicemail. From Dad. It might help if we just temporarily shift some paperwork. I didn't answer. He kept going. Just to streamline things. From Dad. Make transitions smoother. Smooth for whom? Roy and I paid off this house 20 years ago. I said, finally. There's no mortgage. No lien. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. No confusion. Marcus nodded. Of course. But if something were to happen, you don't have a will on file. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, we just want to make sure I'm not a legal complication, I finished for him. Elena opened another folder and pulled out a single-page document. We had the notary at my office draw this up. Nothing binding. Shuanj, I just permission for us to act on your behalf for property matters. She slid it across the table, along with a pen. Blue ink. Always blue. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail. From Magfa, Roy had a thing about that. Said black ink looked like a funeral notice. I didn't touch the pen, didn't touch the paper, just looked at Marcus. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The baby I once held during fevers. The boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. His eyes said this was kindness. But everything else said control. With voicemail from Dad, I smiled small and slow. Leave the paper, I said, folding the album tight against my chest. I'll think on it. They took that as agreement. They always do. But I'm buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But I've learned something this week. When people underestimate you, let them show you who they are while you quietly take notes. I hadn't been to First Alabama Credit Union in almost 2 years. Roy handled all that. Said the people there knew him, trusted him, I believed him. But that morning, I put my ziz with a voicemail from Dad. I put on my Sunday slacks, tied my scarf the way he liked, and drove myself down there. The air inside smelled like lemon cleaner and old carpet. On a chain, same framed photo of the local football team from 1996. The teller recognized me. "Mrs. Carter?" she said, her voice low and kind. From Dad. "I was so sorry to hear about Roy." I nodded, smiled thinly. "Thank you, Helen. He always liked this branch." She led me into a small glass office in the back, with a voicemail from Dad. I sat stiff in a chair that squeak-ached, clutching my purse with both hands. "I just want to make sure. Everything's in order," I said. "Of course," she said, already typing. "Do you have your ID?" I passed it over. Helen clicked through the screen, reading quietly. After a moment, her brows knit together. "Your joint account is still active," she said, slowly. "But it's had some unusual activity." My stomach turned. "Unusual." She swiveled the monitor toward me. "Here, these withdrawals started 5 days after the funeral." I squinted. 300 here. 250 there. From Dad, then 400, labeled as S transitional fee home evaluation. "Des, were you expecting someone to access this?" she asked gently. "No," I whispered. Roy had told me, clear as day, that the account was for funeral and peace only. His exact words. Once paid, it would rest. Apparently not. "Pico, can I see who authorized those?" I asked. Helen tapped further. "Online access. From a new device, and but under your login credentials." My fingers curled around my scarf. "I haven't logged in since maybe last year." Oh, she hesitated. From Dad. "Do you want to place a hold? We can freeze the account temporarily." "Yes," I said quickly. "Please do." "And," she added, from Dad, "there's also a savings account under your name only. Roy added your name 5 years ago. It hasn't been touched." I looked up, confused. "I didn't know I had one." Helen smiled faintly. "It's not large, but it's yours. And safe." She slid a printed summary across the desk. For the voicemail from Dad, Roy had tucked away small deposits, 50, 70, $5 at a time, over years. No fanfare, just quiet preparation. I blinked fast when my phone buzzed with the voicemail from Dad, suddenly unsure if the moisture in my eyes was anger or gratitude, maybe both. That night, I pulled Roy's old file box from the closet. It was dented at the corners. For the voicemail from Dad. The metal latch rusted. He used to call it the vault, though it was just a leftover tin from the hardware store. Inside, folders, yellowing envelopes, a cracked calculator missing the 8 key. I lit the desk lamp and started reading. One tab redef. SAVNGS MSMC. C inside. Sat with a voice bemailed. From there were carbon copies of deposit slips, handwritten notes in Roy's blocky script. Mother 75 porch repairs cess. Heath 120 Emma's dental. 60 winter fund, don't forget salt. See, the last line made me smile. Roy hated icy steps. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, said nothing humbles a man faster than falling on his own porch. Behind those slips was a document I didn't remember signing. My name. Roy's name. A voicemail from Dad. A signature that looked like mine the date 6 months ago, but I don't recall sitting at any bank. I looked closer. Yes, it was my handwriting. Or close enough. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, then I remembered we went to update the mailing address after they changed our rural route. Roy handed me a clipboard in the lobby. "Just routine stuff," he said. Buzzed with a voicemail. From Dad. Name, date, initials. I signed where he pointed. Apparently, it wasn't just a change of address. He'd added me as sole beneficiary to the savings account. From Dad. Another folder. Emergency Trust, PRIVAT. Sarah held a letter, folded tight. On the front, in his handwriting, for Marilyn. If they try. Voicemail from Dad. I opened it. If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. And if you're reading this, they've likely made you feel small. Maybe even disposable. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Don't believe it. You've held this family up longer than they'd ever realize. This trust is yours. Don't let anyone move you without consent. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I've structured it airtight. Let them think you're just grieving until you're ready. Love always, Roy. I sat there, the desk lamp humming. Letter pressed to my chest. They thought I was drifting. But Roy, he'd anchored me in advance. Every form. Every deposit. Every signature I thought was nothing. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Head Meaning, while Marcus and Elena talked transitions, Roy had left me a foundation, not just of money, but of memory, of worth. And now that I knew, I wasn't leaving. A voicemail from Dad. Not quietly, not at all. The phone didn't ring for 5 days. Not Marcus. Not the church. Not even Ruth from across the street. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, who used to bring over banana bread when Roy shoveled her driveway. Silence. I moved from room to room with a mug that went cold too quickly. I didn't drink the coffee, just held it. Somewhere along the 3rd day, the mailbox filled with flyers. List your home. Top price. We buy estates, cash now. A card slid under the door. Our transition specialists for seniors. No return address. Subtle pressure. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, wrapped in pleasantries. The porch light flickered again. I didn't fix it. I left it blinking like a signal to no one. At the grocery store, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail I did, people looked at me like they knew something I didn't. You still at the old place? Too casually. Of course, I said. She didn't reply. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just scanned my apples a little faster. At church I sat alone. They'd moved me from 2nd pew to 4th. Someone else had taken our spot. No one said why. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Pastor Tim nodded at me from the pulpit, but didn't stop to chat afterward. I stood near the exit longer than I should have, waiting for someone to say something. With a voicemail from Dad. Anything. But their eyes slid past me like I was part of the wallpaper. Maybe Marcus had started telling his version of things. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, maybe silence was easier than asking questions. On the 5th night, I opened Roy's closet. His flannel still hung there, soft, faded, a button missing at the cuff. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I pressed my face to the sleeve. It smelled like cedar chips and Old Spice, like memory. I stayed there for 10 minutes, maybe more. Not crying, just breathing. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, trying to remember the sound of his laugh when he burned the first batch of pancakes. The way he'd slap the counter and say, well, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. They'll eat like toast. I sat on the edge of the bed. The sheets were cool. The fan above whirred softly. This was the house we had built. When my phone buzzed with a voice like Dad, not just of wood wiring but of mornings like that, of quiet laughter, of whispered prayers before overdue bills. And now everyone had stepped away from it. Stepped away from me, not in anger, but worse. In a different was late afternoon when I heard the knock. 3 quick taps. A pause. Then one more. I waited. When my phone buzzed with that Dad, unsure if I imagined it. But it came again, lighter this time. When I opened the door, Harper Miller stood on the porch, twisting the hem of her T-shirt. 10 years old, maybe 11, blonde ponytail, scuffed tennis shoes. Hi, Mrs. Carter, she said, eyes wide but not afraid. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, my mom said. I could come ask if you had any books I could borrow. I blinked. She pointed to the tote bag slung over her shoulder. It's for summer reading. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I already read all the ones at home. Behind her, the sun spilled across the sidewalk in long yellow streaks. I stepped aside. With a voicemail from Dad, come in. She followed me quietly to the living room. I pulled a few hard covers from the shelf. Laura Ingalls Wilder, E.B. White. When on my phone with a voicemail from Dad and old Nancy Drew that still smelled like glue. Harper ran her hand over the covers with a reverence I hadn't seen in years. Can I sit while I read a little? She asked. Of course, I said. She settled cross-legged into Roy's armchair, the one no one had touched in weeks. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the cushion gave way with a soft sigh, like it remembered being used. I brought her a glass of lemonade, no sugar. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and just lemon and cold water, and sat across from her with my own book, though I didn't open it. Instead, I watched her read. Her lips moved slightly. Hers with a voicemail from Dad. Her foot tapped to a rhythm only she heard. After 10 minutes, she looked up. This one's about a girl whose house gets taken away. From Dad, but she hides a treasure under the floorboards. I smiled. Smart girl. She's not scared, Harper said. Even when the bad people come. We read together for nearly an hour. No talk. No rush. Just paper, breath, and sunlight. When Harper finally stood to go, Mun buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, as she hugged the books close to her chest. Thank you, Mrs. Carter. You have the best ones. I walked her to the porch. She paused before heading down the steps. Fondler buzz with a voicemail from Dad. Can I come back tomorrow? Something in my chest loosened. The tight coil I hadn't even realized was wound so high. Yes, dear. From Dad. Anytime. Anytime. When the door closed behind her, the house didn't feel so quiet. Not quite full, but not empty either. Just, waiting. And for the first time in weeks, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I let myself believe maybe not everyone had forgotten how to knock. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard laughter in the foyer. Not just a chuckle or two, but the polished kind, too high, pitched to be real. I came down the stairs slowly, one hand on the rail, wearing the same navy sweater I wore to Roy's service. It felt like armor now. The living room was full. 5 people, maybe 6. Folding chairs. A table set with mini quiches and cold lemonade. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, coasters I hadn't seen in years, pull from the drawer, a loudest drawer and Elena, center stage in cream slacks and a blouse too crisp for a casual visit. Oh, Marilyn, she said, voice bright. You're just in time. A man in a slim gray suit turned. Mrs. Carter, pleasure. I'm Simon from Rockwell Realty, from Wagauter. Your daughter-in-law has told me so much about the property. The word hit like a slap. Property, not home. Not your home. I started. A voice from Dad. But Alina cut in. She's been so brave through all this, she said, smiling wide. We're finally moving forward with her transition plan. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it's such a relief to have everyone's support. Everyone's. I glanced at Marcus, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, saying nothing. From Dad, someone gestured toward the hallway. Mind if I take a few photos before the light changes? Elena nodded. Of course. Marilyn, when my phone buzzed with the voice from Dad, would you mind stepping into the kitchen for a moment? I didn't move. Not a muscle. My eyes scanned the room, the sofa Roy reupholstered by hand. When my phone buzzed in voicemail from Dad at the rug I'd woven with Ruth during the summer of '94, the framed cross, stitch above the fireplace. This house is built on grace, not grain, and now. That voice from Dad. They want it all staged. Lit, priced. Like I was already gone, like I'd agreed to vanish. Simon drifted into the hallway with his camera, stapled into the voicemail from Dad, snapping at angles like he was cataloging a memory. I hadn't given up. 2 men I barely knew, neighbors from 3 houses down, nodded politely at me when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, then returned to chatting with Elena near the fireplace. She's handling it all so gracefully, Elena said, placing a slice of lemon tart onto one of Roy's plates. Leaned in, and she agreed to all this. Elena smiled. Of course, it's best for everyone at her stage. At her stage. Like I was a diagnosis. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, like my existence had phases, build, serve, fade. They hadn't noticed me still standing, 2 feet from the room, hands folded so tight I couldn't feel my fingertips. Buzz with a voicemail. From Dad, another guest, a tall man with glasses, looked up from his coffee. So, Mrs. Carter, if you don't mind me asking. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, where will you go? The question floated into the room and settled heavy as dust. Elena looked over her shoulder, as if remembering I was still there. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. We've been looking at senior communities, places with activities and less upkeep. I said nothing. The man blinked. Ute, where would you want to go? I looked at him. Not unkindly. Just looked. He shifted in his chair. Behind him, Sums with a voicemail from Dad. Simon adjusted the curtain tiebacks, Roy's curtain tiebacks, handmade from twisted jute and stained with walnut oil. The camera flashed. The lemon tart was untouched. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, Marcus stared at the floor, arms still folded. A boy who once built Lego castles in that very corner, now letting strangers tour the kingdom like it was foreclosure. And me, I stood still, like wallpaper, like furniture no one knew how to price yet. The wind moved fast that day, unexpected for spring. I was sipping my latte, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It slipped through the back screen door and swept through the living room like a warning. One sharp gust, and the photo frame on the mantel clattered to the floor. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. It didn't shatter, but the sound cracked through the conversation. Elena flinched. Simon lowered his camera. I crossed the room before anyone could reach it, bent down slow. The carpet was thin there, no cushion left, just the hard memory of decades beneath my knees. The frame lay face down. I turned it gently. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, our wedding photo, Roy in a borrowed suit, smiling like he'd built the world with his bare hands. Me in a dress I sewed myself, lace sleeves, too short at the wrists. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the corner was chipped now. I brushed the dust off with my sleeve. When I stood, no one was speaking. They watched me like they were waiting for the punchline. With a voicemail from or a breakdown, I didn't give them either. I held the frame to my chest and met their eyes one by one. Then, I spoke. "This house is not for sale." Alina stepped forward. "Marilyn, we talked about." I said. I repeated, louder now. "This house is not for sale." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. One of the women looked away. I set the photo gently on the side table, upright. Dad, next to the jar of dried lavender I hadn't moved since Roy passed. Alina blinked. You don't mean. I do." Silence stretched. I could hear the tick of the kitchen clock, the distant thrum of traffic outside. Simon lowered his camera. Sipping my latte, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "I think I'll come back another day." He left without shaking hands. The others followed, politely murmuring excuses. Soon it was just me, Marcus, and Alina. When my phone's with a voicemail from the lemon tart was still untouched. I picked up the empty guest plate and carried it to the sink. I didn't slam it. Didn't cry. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just let the water run until it was hot enough to steam. They stood behind me like shadows, unsure where to fall. And for once, I didn't fill the silence for them, and let them sit with it. Let them stew. Because now they knew I wasn't backing down. Not this time. But if your child tried to erase your life's work, would you fight for it? Or walk away quietly? Comment 1 for justice. Comment 2 for forgiveness. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The kitchen was quiet now. Even the fridge, usually humming, had gone still, like the house itself was holding its breath. I sat at the table. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, elbows on the old Formica top, Roy's mug cupped between both hands. Cold tea. Not that I cared. The sun had dipped behind the pecan tree out back. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. That's when I remembered the box. Not the tin file box upstairs. The other one. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the one Roy kept beneath the basement stairs, he called it the emergency kit, though I'd never seen a single bandage inside. He'd warned me once years ago. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "If something ever happens and I'm not here, go look." At the time, I rolled my eyes and told him not to be dramatic. He'd grinned and said, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, "You'll thank me one day." That day was now. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer and stepped down into the basement. The air was cooler down there. When phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, thick with concrete and time. The box was exactly where he said it would be, rusted, heavy, covered in dust and an old towel that smelled faintly of paint thinner. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I brought it upstairs and set it on the kitchen table. The latch gave with a creak. Inside were 3 items: a thick envelope, a folded manila folder labeled as Langley. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and a sealed letter with my name in Roy's writing. I touched the letter first, fingers tracing the pen strokes. Then I opened the folder. Deed copies. Tax records. With a voicemail from Dad, partnership back filings dated back 5 years. One name repeated throughout: Ben Langley. I frowned. Ben Langley. Roy's old friend from the county co-op. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a quiet man who wore suspenders and once brought us sweet potatoes every November. But these weren't just garden notes. According to the documents, Roy and Ben had signed a small parcel of land, 6 acres just outside town, held in trust, and the beneficiary, not Marcus, not the Carter estate. It said, about the voicemail from Kamar, sole successor. Sure, my breath caught. I turned to the sealed letter. Roy had written across the back, "Dard, if they ever try to take the house, use this first." And suddenly, I understood. He'd seen it coming. I opened the letter with hands that weren't steady. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but the moment I saw Roy's handwriting, blocky, a little slanted, with the loops he always made in his R's, something in me calmed, like he was still in the room. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just sitting across the table, waiting for me to read, Marv, if you're reading this, something's happened, maybe expected, maybe not, either way. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you these things in person. I paused. The words swam a little. My eyes weren't used to seeing him talk anymore. So I know how you are. You'd have said I was being paranoid, that Marcus would never do such things. That Alina's just a little bossy. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, not cruel, I've been watching. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the words settle. The way they speak to you. The Thumbist with a voicemail from Dad, the way they brush off your voice like it's wind. You don't see it, but I do. That's why I started the Langley Trust. Quiet. Small. Off the books. My let when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Well, just in case the day ever came where they tried to turn your life into their convenience. I swallowed hard. The edge of the paper cut lightly into my thumb. I didn't when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But I didn't move. These papers, they're not just for ownership, they're for your anchor. When my phone's with a voicemail from dumb Dad, so no one can shove you loose without a fight hair. You don't need anyone's permission to stay in your own story, Mar. But that line broke something open in me. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, tears slipped down before I noticed. I wiped them away roughly, like Roy would have done with grease at the end of a jawverb. I couldn't protect you forever, Est with a voicemail from Dad, so I tried to make sure you'd never be at their mercy. This house, that land, they are yours. Yours? When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, even when they treat you like a guest in it. Don't let them erase you. Dev love always. With Roy. I folded the letter with slow hands, pressed it to my chest. From Dad, and just sat there in the kitchen, sun fading, paper warm from my heartbeat. Whispering into the stillness, buzz of the voicemail. From Dad. I won't let them. I left the house early the next morning, Roy's letter folded in the pocket of my cardigan. I didn't reread it. I didn't need to. From Dad. The words were stitched into me now. Downtown was quiet for a Tuesday. The air still held spring's chill when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but the sunlight had that golden edge, like someone had cracked open the sky just enough to warm the bones. I parked outside the county clerk's office when my phone a voicemail from a squat brick building with sun, faded blinds, and a flag that never seemed to fully unfurl. Inside, the tile floor squeaked beneath my shoes. The walls smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. A young woman at the counter looked up, surprised but not unkind. Can I help you? Yes, I said. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail, font I need to check a property filing. I believe I'm the listed owner on a parcel co, signed by Roy Carter and Ben Langley. She typed quickly, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Do you have an address? Not a residence. It's listed under Langley Agricultural Trust, about 6 acres outside of town. She nodded. A few clicks later, from Dad, her eyes narrowed not in suspicion, but recognition. Here it is. You're listed as sole successor. Filed 5 years ago. It's clean. Held in trust. Bypasses probate. No lions. No hairs. She turned the screen slightly so I could see it myself. My name. Typed clear. No asterisks. No conditions. Just mine. She printed a copy, stapled it neatly. Do you want a certified version? She asked. No, I said, taking the papers carefully. Phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. This one's enough. I walked out into the bright morning, blinking against the light. Didn't go straight home. Instead, I pulled into the empty church lot. When my phone's with a voicemail from Dad, parked under the same oak tree Roy always liked, the seatbelt clicked loose. I let the engine idle. For a moment I just sat there, sun across my lap, with a voicemail from Dad, fingers gripping the warm edge of the paperwork. It wasn't just land. It was proof. That I mattered. That someone saw me. Even after death. Forward when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and now I had something they didn't count on. A choice. A voice. And time enough to use, but I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but because something inside me had finally turned from grief to motion. The house was still. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the kind of still that used to comfort me, when Roy's breathing was steady beside me, and the world could spin outside while we held our own quiet center. But now, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was different. I sat in the chair by the window in what used to be Roy's room. His books still lined the shelf, one sock still tucked behind the nightstand. When my phone with a voicemail from the clock ticked softly, 1:15. Then, too, I held the letter again, ran my thumb along the crease I'd made folding it earlier. Outside, the porch light flickered. It always flickered when the wind came from the east. Roy said it was the wiring, but never fixed it. Some things gotta stay honest, he used to joke. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, on the far wall his toolbox sat unopened. It had been weeks since I touched anything in here. I looked around, really looked. For the first time since the funeral, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The photos on the dresser. A loose cufflink, his old bookmarked with the leather spine. Still bookmarked with a grocery receipt from 2 years ago. Flour, turpentine. Lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. And honey and roasted peanuts. Roy had been preparing even back then. I remembered something else suddenly. A name. We were in the garden maybe 2 years ago. On buzzed. Voicemail from Dad. He was talking about Truff's paperwork lawyers. I'd half tuned him out, brushing dirt off my knees. But he'd said it clear. If anything ever gets dicey, my phone was with a voicemail from Dad. Look up Callahan. Mazed old school, but he knows how to protect what's yours. I stood up slowly, knees stiff, heart suddenly sharp, back in the study. I opened the laptop, dusty, battery long dead. I plugged it in, waited for the screen to come alive. The search bar glowed in the dark. I typed, as Matthew Q. Callahan, attorney, Alabama Trust litigation. There he was, still practicing. Office in town. 5-star reviews. Forewarn my phone, known for discretion and tenacity. One said. Tenacity, that was Roy's favorite word. I bookmarked the page, then opened a blank document. Typed one sentence. From us, Dad. This is to record in writing that I will not be moved out of my home without my full and knowing consent. I read it once, twice, then saved it. Because with a voicemail, not because I thought it would be enough, but because it was a beginning, and beginnings matter. With a voicemail, I know the sky was just starting to shift when I noticed the color behind the curtains. Not quite morning, but no longer night. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the kind of blue that feels like holding your breath, I pushed the laptop aside and reached for a yellow legal pad from the drawer. A voicemail from Dad. Roy kept dozens, said writing by hand made things feel real. I clicked his old pen, the one that always leaked near the cap, and I started a list. Von Meisbuzz with a voicemail from Dad, and far things I will not leave behind's wedding band. Roy the photo of Marcus with the crooked grin. Foiba my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Age 7, my mother's quilt stored in hall closet. Roy's rocking chair. The kitchen radio, even if it only plays static now. I paused. Took a breath when my phone buzzed with a voicemail of Dad. Turned the page, people to call, Matthew Callahan lawyer, Alzer verify land deed, request meeting, Helen at the bank, the confirmed savings status. With a voicemail from Dad. Remove digital access of county office, obtain clean property cert copies. The pen moved smoother now. I flipped the page again. When my phone buzzes things to do, Dad, promise things to do, replace porch, light bulb, label boxes, cleared AEP, storage, domite, on my term C, write personal letter to Marcus, not now. I was sipping my lead when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. But soon and then, last on the page I ordered Z, ask Harper would she like her own bookshelf. That one stopped me. I underlined it, then underlined it again. From Dad. It wasn't just about saving space, it was about offering space. A corner, a chair, a lamp. A place for stories to grow. Because this house wasn't just a memory. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, it was still alive. And I wasn't just protecting it from loss, I was preparing it for use. By morning, the list was smudged with ink, and the tip of my pen was dry. But I felt steady. Not hopeful. Not yet. But anchored. Roy had once said that rebuilding starts not with walls, but with will. I folded the list, tucked it beside his letter, and stood up slowly. The floor creaked under my bare feet. Same old sound. For my laddie when mine buzzed on with a voicemail from Dad. Yeah. But for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like the house was settling. It felt like it was listening. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the bell above the door chimed low when I stepped up into the office. Matthew Callahan's name was painted in gold on the window, half faded by time and sun. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the building smelled like dust and lemon oil, the kind of place where nothing rushed and nothing got thrown away without a second thought. A woman behind the desk looked up and smiled. You must be Mrs. Carter. Mr. Callahan is expecting you. I nodded. Thank you. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, dear, where she led me through a hallway lined with certificates in black and white photos of buildings long since torn down. Callahan stood when I entered, tall, a silver-haired, thick glasses balanced low on his nose. He wore a tie, but the top button was undone. Mrs. Carter, he said warmly. Have a seat. When phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I hear we have some paperwork to look at. I handed him the folder, deed copies, trust documents, and Roy's letter folded neatly on top. He opened the file slowly, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet hum and a careful nod. I remember Roy, he said after a minute. Stubborn. Sharp. Good instincts. Sometimes too sharp, I murmured. Callahan chuckled. Better sharp than blind. He read in silence for a while. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I watched his eyes move across the page, steady and methodical, like he was building something invisible from bricks only he could see. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. This trust is solid, he said. Roy was smart to bypass probate. Busted with a voicemail from Dad, and he named you sole beneficiary in all the right places. I exhaled. Didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. But, he added, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, if your son or daughter-in-law tries to challenge you, legally or emotionally, you'll want a plan. I nodded. Buzzed. With a voicemail from Dad. That's why I'm here. Callahan steepled his fingers. Then let's talk about contingencies, asset protection, and the most important thing, authority. For he reached for a yellow pad. Tell me, says Miss Tivers, on buzzers with a voicemail from daughter, how loud do you want your no to be? A Callahan flipped to a fresh page on his legal pad and started outlining. First, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, we'll file a restatement of ownership for the Langley parcel, he said, tapping the edge of the folder. Voicemail from Dad. Just to reinforce that it's untouchable and held in your name exclusively, I nodded. Second, we update all banking records. When a voicemail from Dad, your husband did a good job keeping things clean, but we'll remove any old digital access, add multi-step verification. Only you sign. He looked up. You use online banking. Barely, I said. I still call Helen. He smiled. Even better. He jotted something else down. Third, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'll issue a formal notice of ownership intent. That'll go out under my letterhead, just a quiet declaration that you're not in transition. Sipping my ladbuzz with a voicemail from Dad, and that no decisions can be made on your behalf without explicit, notarized consent. I sat a little taller, not because it felt like victory, but because it felt a voicemail from Dad, factual. Callahan glanced up from his notes, and last any mail regarding this house, from agents, buyers, surveyors, comes here to my office. Will be your screen. I don't want to fight, I said. You won't start one, he replied. But you'll finish it with paper. Not yelling, he slid the notepad toward me, 4 neat bullet points, each one a small act of defense. A quiet wall. He folded his hands. One last question, Mrs. Fonter Carter. I looked at him. Do you want them to fear you or respect you? Or respect you? I didn't answer right away. The question wasn't cruel. It was practical. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, weighted with years of watching families break apart over things meant to bring them together. I don't want either, I said finally. He waited. I want them to remember I was never weak. Just quiet. He nodded. Then, softly, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, that's usually the strongest kind, I didn't drive straight home after leaving Callahan's. Instead, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad's, I turned off Main and pulled into the gravel lot beside Whitman's Lumber, same shop Roy used for over 30 years. The place hadn't changed. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, still smelled of pine dust and motor oil, still had the same bell on the door that never rang right. Ben Whitman looked up from behind the counter, his beard grayer, from Dad but his eyes still quick. Well, I'll be, he said. Haven't seen you in some time, Mrs. Carter. Been a season, I said, smiling gently. I'm looking to commission a piece. He raised a brow. What sort? A bookshelf. Small, low to the ground, maybe 2 shelves, simple lines. Unfinished pine. He scratched behind his ear. For you? For someone younger, I said. He didn't ask more. Ponsum Dad just pulled a stub of pencil from behind his ear and sketched a quick rectangle on a scrap of brown paper. Solid build? Very, I said. A voicemail from Dad. It needs to last. On the talked measurements, delivery. I paid in cash on the drive home. The sun was warm through the windshield. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I rolled it down halfway and let the breeze in, hand tapping softly on the steering wheel. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt prepared. There's a difference. Formula Dad when my phone buzzed with a voicemail land from Dad. At the stop sign near Sycamore and Lane, I paused longer than I needed to, just thinking. If I gave Harper that bookshelf, made it hers, let her choose the paint. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the order of the stories, would she understand what it meant? That it wasn't just wood and nails. That it was permission. To stay. To belong. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. To be someone who could keep a room lit just by showing up. When I turned onto our street, the porch came into view. And there she was, Harper, sitting on the top step, legs swinging, a canvas tote on her lap. The strap was fraying, but her grin wasn't. She waved when she saw me. I waved back, something steady blooming in my chest. I hadn't told her a thing. Not yet, but somehow I knew. She'd be the first to know. They arrived just after lunch on a Thursday. Marcus in a pressed shirt, from Buzzit with a tie too tight, Alana in heels too high for our old porch, and behind them, a man in a charcoal suit, thin briefcase in hand. I watched them from the kitchen window, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the kettle still hissing. 3 cups were already set on the table. I wasn't surprised. They rang the doorbell this time. Progress, I suppose. With a voicemail from Dad, I opened the door and stepped aside. No hugs, no greetings, just a clipped, "Why, Mom?" from Marcus and a nod from Alina. The man introduced himself. Darren Croft, with a voicemail from Dad, legal counsel for the family. The interesting choice of words. I led them into the living room, motioned toward the couch. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, they sat as if it were someone else's house already, legs crossed, briefcases on knees. I took the armchair, Roy's old one. It groaned beneath me, familiar and warm, and buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Croft opened his briefcase. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for meeting with us. I'll keep this brief." He slid a document across the table. "We're requesting limited power of attorney. Temporary. It allows your son and daughter-in-law to manage affairs concerning the house. Utilities, taxes." From Dad, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "Preparation for market, nothing binding or permanent, just logistical." His voice was smooth, practiced. I picked up the paper but didn't read it. Instead, when my phone buzzed to the voicemail from Dad, I reached into the side table drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, white crisp, sealed with a deep blue crest of Callahan and Associates. I placed it on top of the document. Croft blinked. I folded my hands in my lap. Marcus shifted in his seat. Elena glanced at him. "Inside," I said, voice steady. "Sus with a voicemail from Dad. Is a certified summary of my legal holdings, trust declarations, updated ownership filings, and banking authorization protections, prepared last week." Croft opened the envelope. The room went silent as he read. No one moved. No one breathed. Marcus leaned forward. "Mom, what is this?" "A plan," I said, meeting his eyes. "With a voicemail from Dad, the kind your father would have drawn in pencil first." Croft cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, this changes the structure significantly." "Yes," I said. "That's the point." "That's the point." Elena's smile faltered first. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. A twitch in the corner of her mouth, a tightness in her jaw. She leaned forward, folding her hands too neatly. "Sir, you brought in legal representation?" she asked, voice syrup sweet. I didn't answer right away. From Dad, Croft was still flipping through the documents. His fingers paused at the notarized affidavit. "Just curious," Elena went on. From Dad, "Was it really necessary to drag lawyers into this? It's family, after all." I met her gaze. "Exactly," I said. "Because it's family." Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Boundaries are harder to see and easier to cross. Marcus sat straighter, eyes bouncing between his wife and the lawyer. "Alina," he murmured. "From Dad. Let's just wait." "No," she said, louder now. "This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you. You said you were overwhelmed, that the roof leaks. Fun forward that the heater makes noise. We offered solutions." "I didn't ask for a solution," I replied. "I asked for time." Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "You offered take over." Croft cleared his throat and closed the folder. "Mrs. Carter is the sole legal owner of the property and trust assets," he said carefully. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. "And she holds full authority. Any decisions regarding sale, transfer, or delegation of rights must originate from her, either directly or through counsel." Silence. It rang louder than any shouting could have. Elena's lips parted, then closed. Marcus looked pale. Not angry. Not defiant. Just smaller. "She's had this planned," Elena said, the words brittle. I nodded. "Why have? Behind our backs?" "No," I corrected gently. "Soothed with a voicemail from Dad. In front of your behavior." Croft slid the papers back into his case. "I recommend all further correspondence go through Mrs. From daughter, Carter's legal representative. Poor Alina stood too quickly. Her chair scraped against the hardwood. "I can't believe this," she snapped, with voicemail from Dad. "You'd rather treat us like strangers than trust your own son." I stood too, not to argue, but to match her height. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I trusted him to remember who built the house he stands in. She turned to Marcus, but he said nothing, didn't reach for her, didn't look at me. Buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Croft nodded once, quietly professional. "We'll see ourselves out." As they walked toward the door, I didn't follow, didn't explain, didn't soften the edges. Sometimes dignity sounds like silence. The door clicked shut behind them, no raised voices, no slammed fists. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just the hush that always follows a storm, where everything in the house seems to listen, waiting to see what's left standing. I stayed in Roy's chair. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, hands loose on the arms, the edge of my skirt brushing the floor. Then, slowly, I leaned forward and opened the drawer again. His letter was still there, sipping my let off with a voicemail from Dad, creased at the folds, soft at the edges, like it had always known my hands would return. I read it again, not because I'd forgotten the words, but because sometimes, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, when you win, you need a reminder that you're not gloating. You're remembering who taught you how to stand. I folded it carefully, set it back in place. When my buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, then stood up and moved to the window. Outside, Harper was sitting on the porch steps, drawing something with a purple marker. Her head tilted slightly. When mine buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth, a breeze lifted her curls. She didn't notice. She was making something out of nothing. I smiled, not wide, not triumphant. When my phoned with a voicemail from Dad, just the kind that comes when the noise dies down and you realize you're still here, still you. The house felt different now. Not like something to defend. A phone buzzed with a voicemail on from Dad, but like something to return to. Not just mine, but finally, without explanation. I walked to the front door, opened it quietly, and stepped out. Harper looked up. "Want to see?" she asked. I sat down beside her. "Only if you want to show me." She held up the paper. A house, big window, tree next to it, and a small figure on the porch. Gray hair, smiling. "Is that me?" I asked. Harper nodded. "Looks like I have a good view." "You do," she said simply. "A voicemail vidan. You can see everything." I laughed, the soft kind. It echoed down the porch and came back whole. Later that night I made tea. 1 cup. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Daffod of habit, but I left the second mug beside it, not out of habit, out of respect. Some presences don't leave, they just make room. And when I turned out the light, it was with a voicemail from Dad. I did so knowing there would be no knocking tomorrow, because the door to this house doesn't need guards anymore. Just someone inside who knows her own name. When Madam buzzed with a voicemail from Dad and won't give it up, what about you folks? If it were your name on the deed and your own family standing at the door, would you hold the line? Or offer it anyway? When I phoned for the voicemail from Dad just to keep the peace, it had been 7 days. No visitors, no envelopes, no surprise agents, just checking on square footage, for just quiet. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, not the kind that comes from loneliness, the kind that settles in like a warm shawl woven from the knowledge that the worst already came and left without breaking you. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I'd started waking earlier, making the bed before the sun hit the eastern wall, watering the ferns without rushing, letting the kettle whistle a little long. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad just to hear it sing, the phone rang Thursday morning. I let it go twice before picking up. "Hi, Mom," Marcus said. His voice was different, not strained, not stiff, just low. I didn't speak right away. He cleared his throat. I just wanted to check on Harper. She's been quiet lately." "She's fine," I said. "From Dad. She's drawing a lot, sleeps with her socks on." Hey, he laughed. Soft and short. "That sounds like her." Silence bloomed again, but it didn't choke the line. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, he didn't ask about the house, didn't mention Croft, didn't apologize, but he also didn't lie. That I could work with. "What? I hope you're doing okay," he added. "I am," I said simply. "Thanks." We said goodbye. No promises, no sudden changes, but no battle cry either. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just a voice finding its way back to plain language. That afternoon, Harper came into the kitchen dragging her little green backpack. "Close your eyes," she said. I did. Her hand Hands rustled, paper cape. Okay, open. She taped a drawing to fridge. 2 bookshelves. One tall, one short, both filled with color. Mine's coming soon, she said, tapping the smaller one. Been called. He said it's almost dry. I smiled. Looks like they're neighbors. Harper grinned. They live in the same room now. When my phone buzzed with a voice memfrad, so none of the stories get lonely, well, she walked away like it was the most normal thing in the world. And maybe, for us it was. With a voicemail from Dad, I sat down with my tea and stared at the paper. It wasn't just 2 shelves, it was 2 generations, side by side, holding space for each other. That night, with a voicemail from Dad, after Harper went to bed, I sat at the dining table with a fresh sheet of paper. Not a form, not a filing, not anything legal. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, just lined paper from an old notebook Roy had kept in the kitchen drawer for years, I picked up a pen, took a breath. Then I wrote it was all dear me, you didn't imagine it. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, the silence, the cold edge of it, the way people you love can twist their words into knives and still say they meant well. You didn't fail them. With a voicemail from Dad, you didn't fail yourself. You simply stopped asking for permission to exist. Hypes, the words came slowly. I wasn't writing to explain. I was writing to remember. When Ma fussed with a voicemail from Dad, I wrote about the porch light Roy always left on when I stayed too long at book club. I wrote about how it felt to say no and not apologize for the echo, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. I wrote about Harper, how she fills the house without making it heavy, how her presence feels like music I didn't know I'd missed. I wrote until my hand cramped, until my tea went cold, until the house felt still again. Then I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, and placed it under the second bookshelf, the one Harper would paint next week. I didn't label it, didn't plan to read it again, but I needed to know it existed. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, proof that I'd lived this moment without flinching, that I'd chosen calm over noise. Later, as I walked down the hall to check on Harper, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I found her not in bed but curled up on the floor, book still open, tiny hand resting on a half-finished page of sky. Her socks mismatched. When buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, her hair a wild halo on the rug, she'd fallen asleep with crayons scattered around her, like little fallen stars. Phone buzzed and with a voicemail from Dad, I pulled a blanket over her and sat beside her for a moment, brushing a curl from her cheek. This house didn't just survive, it transformed, and so had I. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from not into something new, but into something whole, something that didn't need defending anymore. Just a light left on, and a child dreaming in the quiet. When buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, where no one would dare knock her awake, the flyer was taped to the bakery window. Sess, Family Art Week Thursday reception at 6 p.m. Community Room, Willow Creek Library, Esser. Underneath the bold print, in a rainbow of crayon, was Harper's name. Mixed media. The house with 2 lights. I'd seen the painting already, 3 times, in fact, once half, finished, once framed, and once after she'd taped a small paper moon in the upper right corner. Because every home needs a night. Still, Thursday came with nerves. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I put on a dress I hadn't worn since Roy's retirement dinner, brushed Harper's hair into 2 loose braids, packed a small thermos of tea, buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. The library smelled like old paper and lemon polish. The community room buzzed with quiet chatter, paper cups, name tags, folding chairs. Someone played gentle guitar in the corner. Harper's piece stood near the windows, 2 houses side by side, one tall, deep red with 4 glowing squares, one squat. A voicemail from light blue, with a wide porch and twin lamps by the front steps. Both had their porch lights on. Then buzzed with a voicemail from Dadder. She said they always wait for each other to sleep, the teen volunteer whispered to me. That's why the lights stay on. I nodded, throat tight. When buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, we sat in the front row. At some point, someone said my name. Would I share a word about Harper's art? I didn't rise quickly. From Dad didn't straighten my skirt or clear my throat like I used to. I just stood, walked slowly to the front, and spoke. When my husband was alive, I said, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, had this habit. If I was out late, book quar, even the grocery store, he'd leave the porch light on, always. No matter how late I got home. A few heads tilted. I once asked him why he never forgot. He said, because it's not about you being gone. Dad, it's about me being ready. I looked at Harper then. She was smiling. Braids uneven now. Hands clasped around a paper cup of apple juice. I lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad. Sometimes the lights we leave on, I continued, aren't for the ones who return, but for the ones who are still finding their way. I stepped back. No applause. Just a quiet stillness. Which was better. Most people had gone. The folding chairs were half stacked. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a few kids ran between the book aisles chasing after the scent of cookies someone had left behind. Harper was kneeling beside her art. When my phone with a voicemail from Dad, carefully peeling off the name tag and tucking it into her pocket like it was treasure. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from, I was about to gather our coats when I noticed standing near the refreshments table, mid-60s, maybe short silver hair, no jewelry, soft eyes. She smiled once, then walked toward me. I liked your story, she said. I nodded, unsure if she wanted more. She didn't. Just stood beside me, eyes on the painting. For the voicemail, Dad, I live with my granddaughter too, she added after a moment. She's 8, loves purple everything. We've been together since March. A beat passed, then another. She okay? I asked. The woman's lips pressed together. Better than me most days. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, but we're figuring it out. We stood there in the hush of the library, between leftover music and the hum of a vending machine. No confessions. No advice. Just two women with sagging cardigans and full hearts, breathing through it. Then I asked, quietly, do you leave the porch light on? She turned to me slowly and smiled. Even when I'm already home. That did it. We both laughed, soft and low. No one else heard it, but it felt like enough. Harper came bouncing over. Buzzed was with a voicemail from Dad. Cheeks red, juice box in hand, ready. I nodded. She reached up to grab my fingers, hers still sticky from cookies. We waved goodbye to the woman. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from the night air, I noticed we stepped into the night air. I noticed the street lamps flickering on one by one. We walked to the car in silence, but in the side mirror, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I caught a glimpse of that woman standing just outside the library doors, hands in her coat pockets, looking up at the sky, maybe searching for a moon. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, or maybe them just listening for footsteps that hadn't yet arrived. Some stories don't end, they ripple, they echo in houses with two lights. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, in drawings taped to fridges, in quiet conversations between strangers who now know they are not alone, I don't think I ever wanted a fight. Not really. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, what I wanted was to matter enough that no one would dare push me aside. To be seen, not as a fragile woman past her prime, but as someone who still had a name, a voice. When my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, a key to her own front door, and in the end, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream, didn't plead. I stayed, I watched. And when the time came, pinned my lat when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Dad, I stood where they thought I'd vanish. Turns out, that's where the real strength lies, not in how loud you can speak, but in how clearly you remember who you are. And the house. It still creaks at night. Still smells like tea and old books. Still has two lights on the porch. One for me. One for the stories I'm still learning to tell. The lesson. Yeah, sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. It looks like peace. And sometimes, healing a voicemail from Dad isn't loud or fast. It's a quiet walk back to yourself, one step, one's teacup, one lamp at a time.